Alright, so now we're starting with dot plots. A dot plot is quite literally the things that you think of like in elementary school. When you think of a dot plot, let's think about things. Tell me what you can make a dot plot of. Like think about kindergarten. What's something they would have done a dot plot on in kindergarten? A dot plot is literally a plot of dots. How many pets you have? Give me another example of a good thing that would be a dot plot for. How old you are. Both of those are numbers. Give me an example of a question I could ask you that would a dot plot would probably not be a good thing to do.
What's your favorite color?
What's your favorite color? We can maybe make that work. What will get weird is the order of the bottom. What else?
Your name.
Name. What else? What about something that your answers are a number, but a dot plot might not sound like a good idea?
What grade you're
Why?
Because you're all in the same one.
Because then it just wouldn't be very descriptive. What else? We literally have to draw dots, right? So if I ask people in this class how old they were, how many different options on the x-axis do you think I have? About 2, 3, 4, something like that, right? That'd be pretty easy. What's something to where it's gonna get not worthwhile to put a dot for every number? Think about something. So if I did, ask you this kind of funny. That would make sense. I'm just picking numbers. Whatever our numbers are, that seems reasonable. So what's something that I could do that what I just wrote would be reasonable to actually do and make a graph? These are still numbers.
Your street address.
Street address, like your street number, your house number. Why would that not be a good thing to do? I've got a lot of numbers that are one dot here and there, but nothing ever like accumulates or builds up because they're kind of all over the place. I have way too many options to make it worthwhile to do a dot plot. So with dot plots, we're typically going to be things where our options are usually whole numbers. They don't have to be. And there's a reasonable amount of them, not like a ridiculous amount. Otherwise, at that point, it doesn't get very useful. So this data in front of us says, here's the data on the number of goals scored by the U.S. women's soccer team in the 2004 season. So I want you're going to draw a dot plot. What kind of information am I given? I'm asking that very vaguely. What information am I given right now? Number of goals scored. So how many variables am I given? 1. So if I want to do a dot plot, how many variables do I need? 1. I'm starting to make a point about the difference between 1 variable, 2 variable. Some of that should be obvious, but sometimes people kind of overlook that. So go ahead and in that little space right there, try to make a dot plot. And I know I haven't told you what a dot plot is, but I feel sure that y'all can do it. Try to go ahead and make a dot plot of number of goals scored by U.S. women's soccer team. So most of you start with a horizontal line. What do you need to look at to know to label that horizontal line? What? You said it. The range. So you need to know the smallest number and the highest number. If a number isn't included, do I need to include it? So would I want to do something like, pause for 2 seconds, I'll let you keep working. Would I want that as my graph? If it was something like that? Because do these look very far away from those? But are they? So even if the number isn't included, include it. So find your highest, lowest, and then include that number and everything in between. Just like everything, your spacing should be as equal as possible, which gets to the point about the dots as well. What's our lowest? Lowest is 0. What's the highest?
8.
How many dots do I have above 0? So when you do this, you need to consider this almost like an imaginary line. Like this. So that I'm not accidentally doing where here is 3 dots. All of a sudden I didn't space that well. And those 3 dots look a lot higher than that. So like in your mind, you're kind of thinking those. It's easier for me because I can at least make the dots that are the same size. How many do I have above 1?
I think it's 7, 8.
Wait.
It was 8.
How many above 2?
6.
How many above 3?
7.
So I should very easily visually be able to tell if this is one more than that and so forth. How many above 4?
3.
How about 5?
6.
Even though there's a gap in between, I should be able to tell those are the same height. What about 6?
1.
7?
1.
8?
1.
No, so we didn't have any gaps. What's missing? Alright, so we'll start with title. So again, I don't care if you write Dotplot of to have it. This one should be really easy, straightforward of what to write here. I'll write word for word specific exactly what it says. What about other labels? Where?
We'll sort underneath.
Number 4.
There's one thing that bothers me about this problem that I think you should add, but I think you should add it because they should have added it. I think there's a word missing here. 2 words.
Per game.
Per game.
Like to me, that's actually extremely important, and they should have put that. How many people did another label? Yeah, which put? So with a dot plot, you're actually not going to get counted off if you don't label the y-axis because literally the dots mean one each. I think it is important, especially for one like this. In this one, I would put, this would be number of what? And because of that, it's not just like how many games. That to me makes more sense, but you're not going to get counted off on a dot plot if you don't put a label up there. So we started out the year with SOCS, the very first day. We're going to kind of come back to that. So just talking about describing anything about this graph, what are some things that you notice that stand out? Just in general, anything that you notice that stands out.
One was the best.
What?
One was the best.
The most frequent amount of goals scored was one goal per game. What else? Just general things.
6, 7, and 8 goals.
And you could even be more generic and say they didn't score above 5 very often. Something like that. They never scored above 8. What else? Just general things to talk about. We're going to come back and write some of this stuff in.
They usually score at least once.
They usually scored at least once. They almost always scored at least once. Yeah.
They very rarely score 4. That's why I compared to the others.
They very rarely scored 4 compared to the others around it, right? What's something if you said, tell me what you notice about typical game, you would probably say about what? Most of the time they, or you can get even more specific, most of the time they scored about, you give me a range there. 1 to 3. Most of the time they scored about 1 to 3. Or some people would say most of the time they scored between 1 and 5 goals. So those are some things we're going to expand on. Is there anything that seems odd or completely doesn't fit in with the pattern?
4 a little bit, but not.
Yeah, 4 a little bit, but maybe not that terrible. I mean, the difference between 4 goals and 5 goals, yeah, okay. And it's only a couple games less, so maybe not. Alright, so we're going to skip down to the bottom where it says, don't forget your socks. And it says, anytime that the problem asks you to describe or compare data sets, I am telling you this once right now, and that is from now until the end of the year unless I say different. So like if I give you a homework problem and it says the word describe and you don't put socks as your answer, the full socks as your answer, I will not give you credit. So if the problem says describe, it means socks. Or compare. We're not yet comparing. Alright, so one of our S's. Does anybody remember what one of the S's was? Shape. We're going to get more descriptive into shape in about 2 seconds. Things about shape. Macy, what was the first thing that you said?
That 1 was the best.
It was the what? It was the mode, and the mode is the one where it peaks and the one that it occurs most. So peak indicates, which is everything that she's talking about in the mode, peak indicates most frequent responses. Definitely that's something to sometimes mention. Some of this I have to be kind of strange about the way I talk about it because we're just not there yet. Where the bulk of the data tends to fall. So that's like we said, most of the time they score between 1 and 3, or most of the time they score between 1 and 5. We can talk about the bulk there. Another thing that we had mentioned is having a long tail in either direction. And no, I don't mean like a dog's tail. Yeah, let's go ahead and do shape now. Yeah, one over here. Flip to the back. There's nothing on the back. I want you to make the back of it be about six fairly equally sized boxes. They don't have to be exactly equal, but we're going to do 6 different things. Alright, so it doesn't really matter which order you start in. I'm gonna start in this top left one. But I'm just gonna draw it bigger so y'all can see it. Draw something that looks like that. What can you tell me about the shape of that graph? One more. What? We don't have to get that far. I mean, you're right. What? Okay, what else? Bell. And a bell shape. And you don't have to draw this. Most people, if I draw that, they think about it. Symmetrical. So symmetrical or bell shape. One thing that I kind of don't mention that much just by habit, it can be symmetric and not be bell-shaped. It just so happens that a lot of the ones that we deal with are both symmetrical and bell-shaped. But if it's bell-shaped, it's going to be symmetric. Like, don't draw this. But a graph like that is also symmetrical. It's just not a bell shape. Anything that folds in the middle on top of each other is symmetric. So where is the mode of this one? In the middle. So here, which is the middle of the graph, you don't have to write that right now. No context. What kind of values do I have here? How many of what kind of values do I have here?
Lots of low ones.
Lots of low values. And then fewer higher values. It's as you get higher, but I'm going kind of brief here. Can you think of a scenario, a realistic context scenario, in which the results are like this, where there's a lot of low values, kind of they all start all of a sudden? Yeah.
Is this the next box?
Yes. Sorry. This is the second box. If you didn't, I mean, it doesn't matter. So basically, all of a sudden, it kind of starts, and where it starts, they all kind of are about the same. This happens in the real world a lot.
Something moving.
What?
Something moving.
Something moving?
Yeah.
So some of them, a lot of them don't move far, but some of them move really far. That's it. That's a good example. You can think about like your driving distance to school. A lot of you don't have to go that far, but there are some people who go really far. That's a good example. Anything with like income, like starting salary, like salary, because you have a lot of people who are starting salary. You have some CEOs, stuff like that down there. The way I remember this is if this is a slide, which direction would you slide, left or right? So this is right skewed. Sometimes you'll hear people say skewed to the higher values. This is right skewed. So what do you think our next graph's going to be? Left skewed. And now it doesn't have to look perfectly like that to be left skewed. There's a bunch over there. It drops off, it goes this way. This is left skewed. So if I want to write it similar to the way I wrote the other one, I would write lots of what? High values, fewer low values. This could even be something like, one quick example is when they deal with like hunting, and they have to you have a cap for your day, like you get to go until you get so many. Some people don't get much. Well, it might be something that would be easier to get, or a good day. Or a lot of people get there and all of a sudden it drops off because it's capped that you can't get more than that much in a day or something. Hopefully some grades of some classes are left skewed. Hopefully. I knew I drew my other ones as curves. I drew them as curves, but there's no reason I couldn't do those as like boxes underneath. You'll need to draw that, but I'm just drawing this curve to make it an easy one. Those should be the same width. I'm just drawing it super quick. What do you notice here?
Is this our next one?
Yeah.
Pretty flat.
Pretty flat. Most of those are pretty consistent. So draw it to where there might be a little bit of variation, but for the most part, they're fairly consistent. Of course, my drawing's terrible. None of my widths are the same. My lines aren't very straight. So the best way to remember what this one is called is to think about in the real world when all of a certain group are purposely made to look very similar. So what is a group that you can think of that they are purposely, it is the intention for them to look very similar?
Cars.
What?
Cars.
Cars works. What about
The army.
the army? What else? The army is the direction I want to go. Well, let's go to the army. Why do people in the army look very similar?
Uniform.
It's called uniform. One year somebody told me nuns. Still works. It's just not the answer I was expecting at the time. You know what I'm because the uniform still worked out. I was expecting army and I got none. So you don't, you can write some stuff if you need to there. Most of those are pretty much the same. There can be variation there, but when they're all pretty consistent, there's not much change. It's uniform. Oh, another good example of left skewed is dates on pennies, because there's a lot that are recent. When it's the most recent year, they haven't really dispersed yet. This one's gonna be very vague and kind of funny. I might draw two and then come back to it. I didn't draw very much. I'll go ahead and draw both. This is your fifth box. This is going to be your sixth. just so you can see kind of general idea of what I'm showing the difference between the two. What does the second one do that the first one does not? It peaks again, it goes back up. We said where it peaks on a graph is what word? So how many modes do we have in the first one? Now, some people take this too literally. Mode means where it peaks the most, right? So technically, how many modes are there in this problem? There's still technically only one, right? But there is definitely a pattern where we see a general peak here and separately another peak here. And that's what it is that we're looking for. That you see trends of something like that.
Does it just have to be two or just any other good one?
I'm gonna write or multimodal. Salaries for a company could easily be bimodal. They could have like a whole bunch of factory workers, and they could also have a whole bunch of like office workers, and they might have CEOs and stuff. So like you're gonna have a group down here that has similar salaries, a group here that has similar salaries, and then dispersed throughout. Might be a good example of something that would be bimodal. So what people get mixed up with, that I don't want you to get too caught up in the literal, based off of what we just said, and I'll come back to it. Does that look bimodal?
Yes.
Do you think there is a trend where everything groups up to one and then separately goes back down to group up again? And some people are like, yeah, maybe, but is that really like a drastic drop to start a whole new trend? It's more like this trend is still here, it just had a little bit less in between. You see the difference there? So don't get caught up so in the literal that, well, it went lower, so it's peaking again. The difference between 4 and 5 really isn't that much. I know my picture is super vague, but I showed that there's a pattern here for a while where it's dropped, not just dropped once or something. So try not to get too caught up in the literal there. So these are things that we would include for shape. These are options that we could use. So going back to this, what are some things you could say about the shape, overall shape of this graph?
It's right.
I would probably say right skewed. And now this one's kind of one of those in between where some people are going to say right skewed and some people are going to say they don't see right skewed, because it's kind of in between, yeah, maybe, or yeah, a lot. So I would probably say right skewed.
Teachers, please pardon the interruption. At this time, please check that all of your students in your classroom have been issued a Chromebook. If you have any student sitting in your classroom that does not have a Chromebook, please send it to the Media Center. Again, any student that does not have a Chromebook in your classroom, please send it to the
Right
Media
skewed,
Center.
I think would be a good word. What are some words that maybe we could make work? Well, there's another one that some people might throw in there. Unimodal. I would probably say this is kind of unimodal. I don't know that I would choose to use that word, but some people would here. I would probably go with right skewed as the best description for that one. It's not so far from symmetric, but I think right skewed is a better decision for that one. Alright, so let's flip it back to the front. So we dealt with shape. What does O stand for? This is one that I have to be very weird in my answers momentarily, because eventually you can calculate how to do an outlier, and at that point the way you answer this problem changes slightly. So right now we're just going to write differs from overall pattern. And then I just want you to put discuss later. Procedures to determine. If it is or isn't. So, right now, if I gave you a quiz and asked you to do this on there, you would say there appears to be an outlier or there does not appear to be an outlier. We're saying the word appear because we literally can't check. But as soon as we can check, if you use the word appear, I'll count off. That's why I have to be funny right now. So we don't know how to do it yet, so you're just saying appear or not appear. Once we calculate it, then I'll come back to it. So you're looking for, did we see any outliers in our girls soccer? I would probably say there don't appear to be any. So if there don't appear to be any, that's my decision. I don't need numbers because there don't appear to be any. In context, what does that mean if there are no outliers? In context of that problem, what does that mean if there are no outliers? They're consistent. Let's go ahead and write this in there. There were no individuals I'm putting no in parentheses because that's if there are none. No individuals with, what word I want to say, uncharacteristically.
And is this just specific to the problem we're doing right now?
Hang on. It's a good question, but I want to answer that. You'll get to the point where a lot of times when I write stuff, I'll write some things in parentheses, and if it's parentheses, it's usually like, hey, I'm gonna end up filling something in there. So I'm writing this one as no. For the context of our problem, what should I put here? Actually, for the context of our problem, I would probably do this and say there are no games with uncharacteristically high or low scores or number of goals. But that's kind of like the direction for what you would do with context there. What is C? I'm going a little bit quicker now. This is super important. No, you're right. It needs to have context. You might think of it as an M instead. Center. So shape is overall general pattern. Outliers is things that look different. So now we need to figure out where do we take that left to right and put it for center. And the next one's going to be how much we stretch it or pull it. So center, I'm going a little quicker than I want to right now. Median, mean is the thing's average. There's a certain time to use each. Discuss later. I was hoping to get to it today, but we probably won't get to it till Monday. Like eventually there's going to be, if the graph is a certain shape, you're going to need to use median. If the graph is a certain shape, you're going to need to use mean. But we're just not there yet on which one to use. Okay. The class's average test score is an 80. Explain. I don't think anybody in here would be confused if I told you the class average was an 80, right? Other than the fact that we had a big test. But if I told you to write it in words and explain to somebody else what that means, probably none of you could do it. So what does that mean for the average to be 80? I'll give you a tiny hint, and let's pretend we're talking about money. So we're doing something for Spirit Week, and the average amount for each student is $5. What does that mean? Does that mean every student in the class gave $5? What does that mean?
all the money was distributed evenly among the students.
If we put all of our money together and distribute it evenly among all of the students, then each student would have $5. And that is the exact interpretation of what it means to be a mean. If I ever asked you to interpret it, that's exactly what you should say. And if I asked you to write down the equation for how you find mean, your equation is essentially your description. Because what do? Add them all up, divide by how many there are. That's what the interpretation is. So most of y'all just don't click to think, oh, that's actually what it means. So let's write, you're not going to know all this notation right now. Put x with a bar over it equals, this is sigma, which means you add them all up, add up all the x's, and divide it by lowercase n. Even though y'all don't know what those symbols mean, y'all know what mean is. If you look at that, you're just saying, add them all up, divide by how many there are. That's fine with me. Median drives me insane to no end. I'm on a tangent here. If I handed AP Stat students, high-level math students, 50 numbers and told them to find the median, what would you do? Right? That drives me crazy. Pretend these are in order. Which one is the median?
C.
What's the median?
B and a half.
And I'm okay with talking about it like that way right now. How many numbers did I start out with here? How many numbers did I start out with here? What placeholder is the median? What the nth number? What number? Y'all with me here? With that part? So how do I get that always? You said I did what with this? Plus 1 divided by 2. If I give you 30 numbers, don't sit there and do this and hope you don't mess up. Put them in order. 30 plus 1 is 30, plus 1 is 31. 31 divided by 2 is 15 and a half. Between the 15th and 16th number. That makes sense. I don't know why in the world that's not in a curriculum to have ever taught you that before you get here, but that's how you find median. So n plus 1 divided by 2 is the where number is. I know that's kind of a weird way to write it because it's some people do. I give you 30 numbers and you tell me that the median is 15 and a half. 15 and a half isn't the number, it's where the number is. And I know I'm throwing a lot at y'all pretty quick here, but this is stuff y'all pick up on real quick. So eventually there's a time to use mean, there's a time to use median. Both of those are measures of center. What's my last S?
Stretch.
Stretch, spread, same thing. It's stretch. Spread is how much it stretches out. So it's how much variability in the data. If I asked you to find, what's a word that describes the spread? Most of you would probably say what? What?
Teachers, please pardon the interruption. At this time, if there are any students in your classes who have not gotten a Chromebook, if you would please send them to the Media Center at this time. Any students who have not gotten a Chromebook need to be sent to the Media Center at this time to pick one up. Thank you.
Range is about the most basic, least descriptive thing you could possibly think of to describe spread. It's probably the only thing that you've talked about really to this point. So as of now, it's definitely an acceptable answer. Sometimes it is going to be a necessary answer, but usually it is not really that descriptive. So I want you right now to look at the example on that page that we did with the girls soccer, I want you to find the median, just to make sure that we all understand what median is. And just think in your head of what you could do for center, outlier, and spread, like what you would say. So I'm going to print something out. Go ahead and calculate and find the median so we're all doing the right thing. And then think about what you would write for center and spread. What do you need to know about the information first?
How many things in the data set?
How many points are in the data set? One thing that I only kind of mentioned, but I always have somebody who just doesn't think about it. Would I want to look at the list the way the numbers are given to me in that problem to find the median? Because they are not what? They're not in order. But what is in order? Your dot plot. So you don't have to rewrite out all the numbers. Your dot plot has the numbers there in order.
Do we do the little n plus 1 thing here?
Yep.
With which number is the n? Do we use 8? Do we use
Total number. Yeah, lowercase n is sample size. I know I've kind of haven't mentioned that. Kind of what is that I'm writing so that you kind of catch on without realizing. Alright, so we decided there were 34 numbers, correct? 34 plus 1 is 35. What do I do with 35? Divide by 2, which gives me what? 17 and a half. So I'm doing with this just so that people see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Does it matter if I start at the top or bottom? No. 16, 17, or 18. So it'd be here. So your median is 3. Alright, so if I were to describe that in context, what does it mean to be the median? What does the median do? Quite literally, what did the median do? Split it in half. So I know that about half of the games, what? They scored exactly 3?
3 or lower.
About half the time they scored 3 or lower, and about half the time they scored 3 or more. Now, the less than versus less than or equal to is kind of vague. That's why we say about. If I said, I don't remember what the mean is for this one. I think the mean's like 3.2 or something. I don't know. If I said the mean were 3.2, you would write the mean of this data is 3.2, which means what? We just talked about this.
If they scored the same amount of goals each game, they would score by 3.2.
You're saying the right thing. Back up and say it with like, interpret it like you're saying the right thing, but interpret it like the math. If they took all their goals in
Divided them.
first, they combined all of their games and then divided them up, which is saying the same thing you're saying. If they took all the season's goals, added them up, and dispersed them equally each game, they would have scored about 3.2 goals each game. These are things that you're going to end up having to write as your SOCS.
How do you get 3.2?
I don't know the math. I would have to go through. I'm just not going to waste time to do that. We talked about outliers. So we said the shape of this one is probably right skewed. What does that mean in context with the problem?
Goals are more likely to-
And so let's talk about, just like yesterday, what are the three things I said most answers need? Context. So that's talking about goals scored, numbers, and compare. Now, compare is kind of funny right now because we're not comparing anything. So we would say most of the time. So how could I pull numbers into that? And if I'm trying to argue right skewed, I would probably say 1 to 3 instead of 1 to 5 because it makes it look more right skewed. Stuff like that's kind of vague. But so we could say this is right skewed. So most of the time they scored less goals, about 1 to 3, than they did scoring more than that kind of thing. Like I said, I'm going to get really descriptive into that, but I need y'all to kind of start seeing the pieces of how all this fits together. Right now, as far as we're concerned, what would our spread be? What's our measure of spread for right now? Range. What is the range for this one? 8. So what would that mean in context?
They always
They
either
never
score.
scored more than 8 points.
Even if it were 15 and 7, it would still be 8. So think about it that way.
Their score never varied by more than 8.
Their score never varied by more than 8. I usually say it like the game that they scored the most was only 8 goals more than the game where they scored the least, or you could say that like opposite. So usually it's the one where they did the most was this much than the one where they scored the least. Again, I'm throwing a lot at you. I'm going to have you write a lot of this down. I just want to kind of put stuff together.